Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone. And now, here's your host and CEO of Rue Global Impact, Deborah Rue.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. And I'm really excited about this conversation. It's another mother with a cause. So I'm very excited to introduce Michele Erwin. She's the CEO and the founder of All Wheels Up. And she created this company because of her son, Grayson, which I'm going to let her tell you that story. But I was introduced to her by Tina Marie, who is going to be on the show in the future. And I listened to her TED Talk and I was very impressed. And so I've actually wanted to have Michele on the program for a while, but I didn't know her. Now I know her. So welcome to the program, Michele.
Wonderful, Deborah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, you have a very powerful story, and I just believe that we can make the world a better place for everyone. And obviously you believe that as well. So Michele, tell us how you got involved with All Wheels Up and what it is and what you're trying to accomplish with this organization.
Sure thing, Deborah. All Wheels Up started 11 years ago. It started because I have a son named Grayson who has spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, and Grayson uses a wheelchair. And I learned really early on that traveling with someone who uses a wheelchair is really difficult and in some instances unsafe. And I really just could not fathom that my son, when he became an adult, would be able to travel on his own, whether it be for college or pleasure or even for work. And then it had me realizing, how are people traveling today? And so I thought, I better start working on this. And so I started doing research and learned that no organization had really taken on the platform of a wheelchair spot on airplanes. And so I started All Wheels Up, and that has been our primary mission, is to get a wheelchair spot on airplanes just like we have on buses and trains today.
Yes, and it was, of course, I've been following this particular issue for a long time. It's amazing. I have so many of my friends that travel using wheelchairs, and the damage that is done to their wheelchairs. There's just so many issues around this. And I also, my brother-in-law is a pilot. And I remember him telling me one time, and this was a few years ago before everything that we're walking with COVID and the pandemic, but he had told me one time that there was this one flight they had and it was delayed, and they had about 30 people that were asking for supports, whether it would be wheelchair supports or early access to get on the plane because they had disabilities. And he was telling me about it, and he said that because of the problem, they said to the passengers, we're going to have to delay putting the passengers with disabilities on first like we normally do because of this. And he said about 15 people got up out of their wheelchairs. And so they actually feel sometimes a little resentful about these issues as well. So it's a very complicated topic. And also the way we build planes and we design planes, and the future of designing planes is very complicated. So will you tell us a little bit more about how are you trying to get your hands around? It's 11 years, but there's such complexity to this. And we sure as heck should not deny people that use wheelchairs the ability to travel around the world. And that's ridiculous. But right now, if you use a wheelchair, a lot of people are afraid to travel. So tell us more about just what you're trying to do with the complexity of these situations.
Absolutely. Deborah, you've nailed it right on the head. This project is enormous and cannot truly be handled by just one organization. And so there's other organizations doing other work, which is great. We've really opened up the doorway here for really robust dialogue, and the key stakeholders are really now engaged in the project. And you're right, logistically, this is such a multifaceted project that we need all stakeholders communicating. And you're right. you have people who take advantage, whether, like you said, it's the wheelchair access to be boarded on time before other individuals, or say even the ESA dogs, emotional support dogs. And so it's very easy for the industry to say, how do we know we're not going to be taken advantage of?
Right.
And we are trying to work through all of these issues. And for someone who's going to want to stay in their wheelchair and travel 3 hours or more on an airplane in their wheelchair is someone who has a wheelchair that's been built for them. This is not the wheelchair that they're picking up at the beginning of the TSA line and they're going to be sitting in, just a regular manual wheelchair that you find at the airport. That's not what we're promoting. What we're looking for is the community that's not traveling. There's a whole demographic of wheelchair users that don't travel because of the risk to their physical self, as well as the damage that can be done to their wheelchairs. And just like, if you've heard me speak in my TED Talks, wheelchairs can cost anywhere between $10,000 to $78,000.
Right.
And that's an enormous cost to someone if that wheelchair is damaged or lost or left at another airport, and that can't easily be replaced. And so that's the demographic that we're going after, because that demographic, 80% of that demographic is not traveling and could really broaden the landscape for the industry.
I agree. And do you mind just telling us some stories about problems that have happened? I have a few of my own I know about, but only to ground the situation so that people understand what we're talking about.
Sure. There's stories every year. There's articles every year on different instances, people being dropped. I know an airline paid $4 million out to a woman who was dropped on the airplane. So that's another reason, it's safety. We don't want people having to transfer from an aisle chair into an airplane seat. But my personal story was, I came on board the airplane with a child, and their wheelchair assistants were, well, this is a child and you can manage yourself. And I had to put my paralyzed child on the airplane. And now the flight attendant was like, you've got to go back to the jetway and take care of that wheelchair and disassemble it or give it to the handlers. And I'm like, I was traveling by myself, and I'm like, who's going to stay with my child? And I was looked at, what do you mean? You want me to take care of him? And he's floppy, excuse me, he's floppy. So he was going to fall over. And I'm like, if you don't hold him up in this seat, then I'm not going to be able to take care of the wheelchair. And so I was able to get a little bit of help, but that support really isn't there. And so that was just my personal experience. And I was mortified. Everybody's staring at me on the plane. Was that person holding up the plane, and hot, and I'm sweaty, and I'm getting back on the plane. And I'm just like, there's got to be a better way. And he's so little right now. Like, I cannot imagine doing this when he's an adult, and I'm still going to hold him up. So it was just really an aha moment for me. That change really needed to happen.
And also, Grayson must have felt horrible. You wind up in those situations, they're dehumanizing both you and your son. I mean, what a horrible, it's already so intense to travel anyway, but on top of it, obviously you're a bad mom, you're holding everybody up. What is Grayson thinking? He's thinking, I don't want to travel. There's so many things wrong with that. But I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind exploring that a little bit.
Grayson is unique in the way I think that he doesn't really let a lot bother him. But I know, in general, he doesn't like to be stared at, and he doesn't want to be a burden. And I know that for other people. And so that's why we're here. We're here to make air travel more dignified for, every wheelchair user that, wants to travel.
Yes. And I also want to bring up another point that people might not be thinking about. And I know Michelle's all over this, but actually people have to go to the bathroom sometimes on planes. And so one of my coworkers, Rosemary, who has cerebral palsy, she can only take flights where she can hold it, so she doesn't have to go to the bathroom. So she can't drink before or during. What people that use wheelchairs are having to deal with, because they don't have the luxury of getting up and going to the bathroom. Remember, the bathroom on those long trips is essential. Sometimes those bathrooms are essential even on a short trip. And there are things that we don't even think about that are impacting these passengers as well. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that as well.
I can definitely give some information. All Wheels Up doesn't necessarily work in the space of laboratories. There's a lot of great organizations like the Paralyzed Veterans of America that is really spearheading that conversation. And they've made, in my opinion, a lot of progress. So for the aisle airplanes, the ones that you would see probably most likely going more overseas and those long haul flights, I believe now it's mandatory that they have bathrooms wide enough for an aisle chair and for people with disabilities to use that bathroom. I do know that for single aisle airplanes, I believe there was conversation as well, and a lot of work being done there as well in regards to making those bathrooms as well more accessible. I know there's original equipment manufacturers really digging in here to make that happen. And I think it's just really putting the pressure on and keeping having those robust conversation with the airlines and your congressperson, and really just letting them know that this is really important to you and it's happening. I know that the community doesn't think it's happening fast enough, but I can tell you 10 years ago, when there was no conversation happening at all for a wheelchair spot on airplanes, to today where Congress is looking at it and has funded a feasibility study, we are further down the ball field than I think anyone ever thought.
Good. That's exciting. So let's talk a little bit more about what you're doing at the organization, because I know it's a research organization. So tell us more about that part of it.
Absolutely. So when we started out, we did contact the FAA. Actually, before I had an organization, I was just a mom calling the FAA with some info I found, and wanted to let them know that the wheelchair securement systems that we have in our minivan and that are on the speed trains already passed a 20G crash test. And that surpasses the crash test standards for that are already set out for airplane seats. And I really just thought the FAA might just need this information and then they would go on their way and create a wheelchair spot. But after a few months of working with the FAA, they couldn't get the funds released to work on the project. And so I naively thought that I'm going to find the funds to work on this project. And that's how my organization was started as a nonprofit. I was like, we're just going to fund it ourselves. And it took us a few years, and we merged with another organization called We Want Accessible Airplanes. They were like a Facebook group site, and they were really passionate. We really were able to merge our two expertises, and we funded the very first crash test of wheelchair securement systems, and at that time a surrogate wheelchair, at an FAA approved crash test facility in 2016. And it really was about making history at that point, because nobody really thought it was possible. The FAA gave us one chance to prove, I guess you could say, the proof of concept that it could be safe. And with the very little funding that we have, I'm really excited to say we proved that a wheelchair spot could be feasible. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it passed anything. I'm just saying it proved it was possible. The wheelchair didn't tip over. The wheelchair didn't fly out of the airplane. All the mechanisms stayed intact. It was what you would call safe and possible. And so we took our research to Congress, and they were really open to listening to the idea of moving forward with a feasibility study at the congressional level. And so in 2018, the FAA Reauthorization Act was signed with the funding for a feasibility study on a wheelchair spot on airplanes. And it took a few years, but we're here. The feasibility study now that Congress is doing is into its second year and should be published in 6 months. And they're basically reviewing our research. So that's really exciting to make it to this point that they could be giving the big thumbs up and stamp of approval to move forward where Congress is going to fund the research.
Well, that is so exciting. And I know that we've tried to solve these problems in different ways, because I've actually talked to designers about this in the past. And some of the ways that we were recommending as a community to solve these problems, the airline industry really did not like, because they are in business to make money. And of course, COVID-19 pandemic has really hurt the entire travel industry, certainly our airlines, but they were very concerned about some of the suggestions because it would take seats away. and they didn't want to take seats away. Now you need to let all of us fly, and we need to fly safely, as safely as we can. And flying is certainly a safe way to travel. But your work is just so powerful because you're actually giving them a way to do it that will keep us safe, that will allow everyone that uses wheelchairs to participate, because some of the efforts that were being made only worked with certain types of wheelchairs. And of course, there are motorized wheelchairs. There are wheelchairs that they're lighter. And once again, this can be a very complicated topic because we use wheelchairs in different ways, and they're different types. And as you said, some of them are $78,000. They're very expensive machines. And I also want to say, and this has been said on other shows, but people with disabilities are disabled by society's lack of wanting to truly make sure that all of us can participate. And I think what you're working on continues to prove that. Society is sometimes accidentally disabling us, and we need to do better. So I think that's why your work is so powerful. And I know that you are going to come back on in the future to talk about another part of the work that you do. We'll get into that on that show. But what can the community do to help you, Michele? What can we do? I know that you said that a lot of the funding, you don't have a lot of funding. I know that you need more funding. Tell us how we help you. How do corporations help you? How do disability persons organizations help? Because this is for all of us. As we pull together the nonprofit, then I'm going to try to talk Michele into being an advisor for Billion Strong, where we talk about identity and empowerment. If we come together as a billion people strong, we'll start being heard. And this is one of the causes that we want to take up. We want to make sure on Billion Strong that we're talking about Michele's work and what they're doing at All Wheels Up and the other groups, because this is one thing we can do with an identity organization, is really take care of all these complex problems that we have. Michele, how does the community get behind to help more?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And that's where we've struggled, is to get those large sponsorships that are going to fund the really big projects. The airlines are asking for data and budget impact models, and those can only be funded, or we can only fund them through larger sponsorships. Right now, our donors are funding our projects, and everybody asks, how are you funded? How are you doing this? And I'm like, $25 at a time. We love our supporters, and we love those $25 donations. So we have projects with universities that are $120,000. It's going to take me a very long time if I have to wait for $25 to come in for each project that we have lined up. And we've got a lot of projects lined up. We are working with some of the top universities in our country. We're working with Wichita, Kansas, the National Institute of Aviation and Research. We're working with Purdue. We're working with Duke University and looking at this as doctors, and why should doctors recommend patients staying in their wheelchairs for air travel? So we have so many great papers that need to be published, and we can only do that with the funding. And that's just with the support data. That's not even the additional research that we're doing and crash testing more securement systems, and really driving that R&D to really get that wheelchair spot on airplanes. And that's not even counting the work that we're doing in the wheelchair sector with making sure that the wheelchairs being designed and built are FAA approved. Like you said, Deborah, it's multifaceted. It's incredible when you just start peeling away that onion and all those layers. It's a really big project.
It really is. And I've had people that I've invited to speak at different events around the world, and that were wheelchair users. And they sometimes have said, if I can get my wheelchair on the airplane and get there, of course, now I have to worry about getting to the destination and not being accessible. But that's a whole bunch of other work that we're doing. But have any corporations got behind All Wheels Up and supported you?
So we have support from large organizations, and even the airlines. Everybody comes to our stakeholder working groups to have those robust dialogue on what they would like a wheelchair spot to look like. And so everybody's having a say, and not waiting for Congress to say it's a mandate, and then nobody has a say of what it's going to look like. So I'm really happy. All the US airlines have attended our working groups. All the large plane manufacturers have joined our working groups, the OEMs, which basically create the seats on the inside of an airplane, the parts organizations. But in regards to the financial support to All Wheels Up, I would say no, that's not there. We don't have that sort of sponsorship. Permobile Foundation has supported our work. Paralyzed Veterans of America has supported our work. And another organization that I always love talking about, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be where we are today, is the ISTAT Foundation, and that's the International Society for Aviation and Transportation. They funded us over 6 years ago when nobody really thought we could do something. And if an aviation organization really gave us that little bit of seed money, it really should go a long way in regards to how far we can really take this. And we're a very small grassroots organization. And I always think of how far we could really go if we were really funded.
I agree. And I would like to see some of the big brands step up and support this, because if you are a big corporate brand, I'd like to see the Boeings, the Airbuses get involved, because this stuff is going to happen. So why don't you help fund it so that we have a win for everybody? Because we want to win for the airline manufacturers, the airline. We do want, and we have to want to win, because if there isn't a win for everybody, it's not sustainable. And so I would like to see more of some corporate brands really step up and support you, because they could come together and support you. And I would say to the brands that watch this show, there's a lot of different ways that you could do this. You could, if you were a telecommunications brand, ICT, the tech brands, you all have benefits for more people traveling. And so I think the hospitality organizations corporate brands should step up. There's a lot of ways, and one thing I can do is what I am doing, telling the story and making sure people know about it. Have y'all done any crowdfunding? Because I would think the community also could get behind this cause. And like you said, $25 at a time, but if we could have a big crowdfunding plan where the disability community gets behind you and supports this, I think that's another way to do it. We don't always have to go to corporate brands, but corporate brands, if you want to care about billion strong, billion people, this is one thing that you can do to make sure that we get included as we get to travel on airplanes if we use wheelchairs. So I was just wondering, have y'all done crowdfunding?
Yes, we have done crowdfunding. We've done one probably almost every year. And we are engaging the wheelchair community in particular. And again, this sometimes is a community that doesn't necessarily have the funds to also donate, and or they have a little less discretionary funding. And my position is, why does it have to be the disability community funding their
Access?
their
We're not included, but then we got to fund you to include us. I agree with you. That's why I'm hoping corporate brands that are listening to this see this as an opportunity, because corporate brands understand that the society's expectations are changing of what we expect them to do to contribute and give back. This is a project that I highly support, highly recommend we all get behind and support you. But one reason why we're doing Billion Strong, Michele, is because we know that there are over 1 billion people with disabilities in the world. We know that for sure. There's probably much more. And then you include people that love somebody with a disability, and it gets much broader. I think there is an opportunity to bring more people. And also, I want to say that this is just not an issue for people with disabilities that use wheelchairs. This is an issue for every person in the disability community, because we have to support each other. We have to fight for captions to make sure people that are deaf or hard of hearing can be included. We have to support accessible websites to make sure screen readers that people that are blind are using, or guide dogs and service animal situations have gotten really out of control. And I know there are groups dealing with that too. And I was talking to a flight attendant one time, and I was traveling with a leader that was blind that uses service animal, and her service animal came on the plane, sat down, just behaved the entire flight. And she was telling us about somebody that was pretending like her dog was a service animal. And this dog was freaking out, running all over the plane, peeing on the floor, just really scared. Obviously not a trained service animal. And by the way, you get in trouble for doing that too, because the authorities were waiting for her when the flight, because she put the flight in danger with the dog doing that, not to mention what she did to her dog. And anyway, so many things wrong with this story. But so once again, as we talk about the complexities of this, very complex, but we need to support Michele's work. We really do need to support it, because people like Grayson And I have a colleague that was born with the same thing, Lamondre Pugh. He travels. He has a very heavy wheelchair that he uses. So we got to get this right. And we got to make sure that Michelle's organization continues to thrive. Obviously, she's determined she's going to do it no matter what, but we need to help. We all need to help because it's in all of our best interests. So, Michele, tell us your website. I know you're on social media. And so tell us how the audience can come and find you to support you.
Absolutely. We are at www.allwheelsup.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, All Wheels Up. We're pretty easy to find. And you can email us at any time at contact@allwheelsup.org.
Cool. And so how old is Grayson now?
Grayson is now 14.
Ooh, fun, a teenager. Not always fun. And so what does Grayson want to do when he is an adult?
He wants to be a scientist. He wants to do biology. So, yeah.
And also, we always really encourage internships. And if you have an internship for Grayson, he's changing the world by his wonderful mother. So I think we got to really support Grayson too. But that's cool. I love hearing that he wants to be a scientist. That's very cool. So, Michele, I know you've agreed to come back on the program again to give us an update and also to talk about your other part of your day job. But let me give you the microphone so you can just give some final thoughts to the audience. But as you're giving your final thoughts, once again, tell us more how we can help you. Because I think sometimes if you leave it up to us trying to figure out how we can help, it's less effective. So of course, we know that you need funding. We'd like to see corporations stand up, but in your final words, tell us if there are other things we can do to help you too. And anytime you have a new event, you have a fundraiser, please send that information to me and we'll socialize that on our social media as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. So we are funded by individual donors and the fundraisers that they host. So if this is something that you feel passionate about and you want to see that goal line of a wheelchair spot on airplanes and the other projects that we're working on, which you can find on allwheelsup.org, you host a fundraising event for us. We have had some really great events. I know, the world is a little shut down and fundraisers look a little different. We've had dinners, and in August, we'll be hosting our first run, and it's going to be a walk, run, roll, and bike. And we're really excited to launch that. And we're hosting it in August because that's International Aviation Month. And so we're really excited to be a part of that. And we may be joining other aviation organizations as we launch that. So that's really exciting. And again, if you have an organization that cannot sponsor, but you have an area of expertise that you can help with, such as writing those sponsors letters or helping with grant writing, or another avenue that I'm not even thinking of, but you think it could work in our wheelhouse, we'd love to hear from you because, like I said, we're a grassroots organization and it really is all hands on deck to make this happen.
Yeah, and I would think any volunteers that want to help you, and you can volunteer to help them on social media. Sometimes just getting the word out and making sure people know what they're doing makes a huge difference. And so it's www.allwheelsup.org. And once again, Michelle's coming back on again. And I really appreciate your work. I really appreciate you and Grayson and everything you're doing because it's a huge issue. And it sounds like you're coming up with some really great ideas of how we can solve it so it can be a win for everybody. So thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you, Deborah. I've really loved being on your show.
Yes, and I look forward to having you come back again. So thank you so much, everyone.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work, brought to you by Rue Global Impact. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your audio. To learn more about Rue Global Impact and the services we provide, visit rueglobal.com. To learn more about how you can become a sponsor of Human Potential at Work, email David at rueglobal.com. That's David at rueglobal.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next time with a new episode.